All righty, welcome. I am Heather Pierce Campbell, the legal website warrior. I'm an attorney and legal coach based here in Seattle, Washington, serving online information entrepreneurs throughout the US and around the world. Welcome to another episode of Guts, Grit, and Great Business. I am so excited to welcome my friend, James Longley, today. Welcome, James.
Thank you for having me, Heather. Super excited.
Oh my gosh, this is way overdue. James and
It
I,
is
gosh, how long have we known each other? A handful of years now, it feels like.
six
Yes,
years probably.
right. So, and our first introduction, was it through the mastermind? Very,
It was
very
indeed.
early mastermind. Yes. And so I met James and his wife, Sveta, who you will hear a bit about today as well. But James, I'm just so happy to see you again. I'm super excited that we are having this conversation. And if you are an entrepreneur really of any kind, this is going to be super relevant for you. So stick around. For those of you that don't know James Longley is a serial entrepreneur, lifelong learner, and co-founder of Learn and Think Better, along with his wife and business partner, Sveta Longley. Throughout their 10-year entrepreneurial journey, they've both committed to continuously developing their skills, ranging from content strategy and coaching to digital marketing, direct sales, public speaking, website optimization, SEO, content marketing, copywriting, and more. That shared love of learning led them to create and refine the principle-based skill development method that now forms the foundation of their cohort-based program, The Future Proof Entrepreneur. I have to say, I love that name so much. I remember when you shared it with me, I was like, yes. And we talked a little bit about how that came about, but do you want to share a little bit about that story with the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. It's
It's a big story, right? It's a big story because it goes back a ways.
Yeah. Well, and with that said, there's also a very considerable piece of that whole idea coming together that comes down to the conversations that you and I have had most recently, but also in the past. So the future-proof element of it has it's arisen from something that I've been fascinated in for years, and it started when I first became aware of this concept of megatrends probably 5 or 6 years ago. And they're essentially the forces that are changing the world of business, etc., for generations or decades to come. And those are things like one concept that was really resonant was womanomics. It was the rise of the female-driven economy, female leadership, etc. There were things like work-life integration, and my wife's absolute favorite one is new men. So these are these new modern men who do all the things that traditionally have been assigned to women in our culture. So those sort of ideas of megatrends sort of infiltrate all areas of our life. But then the future-proof entrepreneur side of things is even more linked to all the pandemic-driven things, like the shift dramatically for traditional employees onto online remote work. Also things like how globalization is basically meaning that whether you're an employee or an entrepreneur, you are competing with everybody. It's no longer a case of like, well, there's John, Eric, and Dave, and they're in the running for this position. It's like everybody is available. So what does that mean? It essentially means you need to have a methodology and sort of a mindset towards cultivating rare, valuable skills that set you apart. And that all happens in a context of just more rapid change than we've ever seen before. And AI, automation, all of that sort of stuff that is already having a pretty transformational effect on business, on work, etc.
Yeah. Well, it is a really fascinating thing to be observing, like in real time. I mean, you and I have been in the online space, for some time now. Some people are new there. I know which kind of seems shocking, but is true. But even it's fascinating to watch the impact, specifically of the pandemic and recent trends, the ones that you've spoken of. even on long-standing traditional industries, right? So like one of my clients right now is in the medical space, and his work and so many doctors, even the nature of their work has changed because there are now companies whose sole job is specifically to bring a doctor from another location into a new location to provide specific services. And so, whereas I think historically most doctors lived very close to where they work, you have all kinds of setups now, just like the traveling nurses, right? Where you have doctors that are committing to a year or multi-year positions where 3 weeks of the month, they might live in Florida and travel to Chicago to actually deliver their services, right? And then they're getting weekends off and a full week with both weekends on either side, home with their family. It's a really interesting model, right? And I've talked with him at length about that. But again, this whole issue of supply and demand and kind of flattening the playing field and having access to people now from all over really is impacting a lot of industries in very interesting ways.
And I think a key point about that is also we can get scared of the change and all of those things that are upending the way the world works. But also, I like to think of it from the perspective of it's shifting closer to a meritocracy in the true sense. It's like, well, and that gets down to issues of equality of access to the training, the materials, etc., to take advantage of or thrive in a meritocracy. And that's a very important aspect and conversation to have. But you can also look at it from the perspective that getting closer to a true meritocracy is reducing and removing some of the barriers that have traditionally been in place that have, in addition to you don't have access to the resources, you also had barriers in your way to getting the job, getting the business that you wanted. So that's one hurdle that's kind of being reduced.
Yeah. What have you noticed most significantly for the types of entrepreneurs that you and I work with in this recent shift? I mean, both from, because I hear you talking on both sides, both from the opportunity perspective as well as the challenges perspective, right?
Yeah. I think the way that I really look at it is, and this is an element of thinking that's been quite informed by Brian Clark from the copy blogger world, where he has spoken about the entrepreneurial employment divide, where as these technologies, AI, automation, etc., become more sophisticated and enter the workplace to a greater degree, this binary sort of situation develops where if you're an employee, you're going to be impacted by these technologies, and the likelihood is you're not going to like the way that you're impacted, because those elements of technology are either going to replace the things that you do and then you're a machine operator, or they are in some way monitoring and watching what you do. So you become a less valuable asset that an employer is looking at. Okay, how can I gradually edge this person out and replace them with technology? But you flip it in the other direction for an entrepreneur, and it just opens up huge opportunity to essentially augment what you're able to do. So if you're a writer, for example, you can now have an abundance of AI tools that can help you with the research. They can help you with just speeding up the repetitive stuff that happens in the background and enable you to lean more into your unique human capacities. And one point about the writing side of AI that, again, Brian Clark brought up was that the true creativity in a writer's work really happens in the editing stage. So if those technologies are augmenting you, speeding up your research process, speeding up even the initial draft, it's the editing where you bring in the magic. So it's a huge opportunity for entrepreneurs to up their capacity, even up their creativity. And that's that binary that I see it. And that's why it's so important to be thinking, as an existing entrepreneur, how can technology augment me as an employee who, in the mindset of the Great Resignation, and the statistics are like 59% of employees in the US are considering a shift to freelance work.
Well, this was going to be my next question. Like, does this mean, given the dynamic you've just described, that we have even more employees converting over to entrepreneurship or running their own little machine or system?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that links to another element that is fascinating, and that Sveta in particular is geared around, because with her work in the sort of health coaching space, which is an element that she brings into this learn and think better business, where I'm very detail oriented and sort of tech oriented, she brings it in that more holistic perspective, which is a gift from above. Essentially, goodness, I've lost my train of thought and what I was saying there as I was complimenting my wife.
That is a forgivable sin. That is completely forgivable, and we hope
yes.
you
Okay,
do
I've
it
got
again.
Yeah. I will do my best to do it again. So essentially, as we shift, another one of the mega trends basically is called the silver generation. And this is the fact that people are living longer. They are, and as much as that's a benefit, it comes with challenges. And the key challenge is you live longer, you need more money. Like retiring at 65 and living to 95, you've got 30 years that you need to deal with.
Yeah.
And that's not only a lack thing, it's also the fact that 65-year-old people have a lot of value still to add. They have a wealth of experience gained over a lifetime of work. And to think they no longer have something to contribute, or that they no longer want to, is I would argue ageism, really. And so you have this concept of some people call it the encore career, but essentially as people finish a traditional career, they might want to transition into entrepreneurship. And if you look at the business success statistics, the most successful small business owners are those older than 40.
Yeah.
And now, can you attribute that to their experience and things gained over their life? Perhaps. But at the end of the day, those older people, they want to do something else. They will be transitioning into work, and increasingly that's going to be online business. And so there becomes the need for skill development, really.
Yeah. Well, I think we are absolutely, watching timelines collapse, right? Because it used to be, I mean, I'm basically whatever the generation is, I'm spacing out, before millennials, right? What is it?
Before Generation X.
Generation X, yeah.
Yeah.
Right? And it's a
Breakfast
shorter
Club.
Yeah, it's a shorter generation though, right? It's a kind of sandwich between two bigger generations. But we're, for the first time, I think we watched, and it's been spoken about, quite a bit since really years and years ago when they began to talk about it, how the loyalty was no longer there, where you sign up for a job and you're a lifer, you're going to be doing that, it, like, there was a dramatic shift. And I think with each subsequent generation, I mean, people have their opinions about millennials. There's so much crap out there that I disagree with, but millennials presenting this whole, group of people who seem to just like live by their own rules. And I think how fascinating is this, that's such a hard pill for other people to swallow, when there's so much that I actually admire about millennials and their commitment to their values, the way that they shop differently than generations ahead of them, right? The way that they make decisions based on financial resources, not kind of in spite of, right? They're a much more, in my view, a much more thoughtful generation around what matters and how they're going to make decisions around what matters, right? And even now, you look at the Great Resignation, you look at how the expectation now is flexibility, lateral movement. I think we have, for the first time in quite some time, an inversion happening in some traditional employment locations, where the new people coming in can demand greater salary than people that have been there ages and ages, because it's so challenging to find those employees and to actually grow certain businesses, right? And so we just have really interesting dynamics happening right now, which I think have caused a lot of confusion in the marketplace. It'll be really interesting to watch how this settles out. But all in all, I think we have some collapsed timelines where people, even more than ever before, are moving, are making decisions. They might be physically moving because they know that they have greater access, right? And greater flexibility from a job and employment perspective. It's just causing a lot of changes quickly for both traditional and non-traditional employers.
100%. And an aspect of this whole thinking around the shifts in work, ranging from the much maligned millennials and their avocado toast expenditure. Fortunately, on that note, actually, there's the new generation. What are they? Gen Z, I think.
Yeah, Generation Internet, Gen Z. Yeah, they have different names.
They get the media's brunt now. So us millennials can take a bit of a back seat, because it's the Gen Z who are quiet quitting and all of this narrative around they don't have the work ethic that we used to have. Yes. And it's so fascinating that you talk about loyalty. I mean, I think a critical mental shift is you have to judge things by the context in which they exist. So if you judge behavior of a certain group by the standards of a previous group in a set of conditions that no longer exist, that's fallacious thinking, I would say. Yeah. And that ties in to the skill development and learning concept. But I think also it is just a fascinating shift in the future of work thinking that I have been informed by, particularly a book by a writer by the name of Taylor Pearson. He wrote a book called The End of Jobs. And a key thing that he said was, and this was a few years ago, so this is not a 2022 book, but essentially he was saying that the central organizing unit of our economy has shifted from the corporation to the individual. Yes. And that, whether you want to call it gig economy, that was perhaps the first iteration of it, or just this freelancer or creator economy, the engine of many economies now is becoming the individual value creators. Yes,
I was going to say it's all about the value creation, 100%. Yes.
And that perspective, whether it's from the skills that you choose to develop, etc., it needs to be geared around the value that you uniquely can create, and specifically linking it back to the technology. It's like, okay, if technology can do this repetitive process, frankly, better than you can, because technology tends not to get tired, need a tea break, or a holiday. It literally just shows up and does the same thing repetitively. Now we can see that as a negative. That's they take in our jobs, and I absolutely sympathize with people who are in a situation where it is literally taking their jobs. But, well, not but, there's an additional point to that, which is that it frees up the opportunity to bring in the uniquely human skills. Yes. And that's where the opportunity lies, I would say.
Well, and I first of all, I love the focus on opportunity. It's like for years, even within the legal world, because people complain about all of these alternative, and I'm like Pac-Man,
lobster hands,
right? Lobster hands, like the Pac-Man chomping mouth, right at the edge of industries that for a long time have been protected, whether it's because of regulation, because of just tradition, right? You look at some of the more traditional industries, and I'm a real proponent for change, and I'm a real proponent for being an early adopter of new methods and different ways of doing things. I mean, the whole reason I built my second business was to stand apart from the traditional marketplace and create a different way of serving the same people. But I think it causes a lot of fear in people that think like, I have to change the way that I've been doing business for years and years, right? What does this mean for me? Like, I think there's a lot of fear for people that are now waking up and realizing really how rapidly they might have to change. And this is where I feel like this conversation with you is so important, because this also will impact the entrepreneurs out there who have been entrepreneurial, who have been, doing their best to not only stay at the forefront, but also stay afloat, because running a solo, for many people, a solo based or small team based business is not always the easiest thing to do. And in an economy and in a marketplace where things are rapidly changing, like, this is the challenge that we have, is how do we remain competitive? How do we remain at the kind of at the front of, the leading edge of the way that we provide services, the way that we interact with and support our clients, the way that we do the variety of things that we do through our work, right? So this is where I'd love to hear from you on how people can meet those challenges. Why, how do we do learning and change and innovation in a way that is supportive and not just completely overwhelming, which I know that it can be for so many people.
Yeah, this is a topic that really gets me going.
Me too.
There's so much to it, and I do think it's relevant to look at it from an employment perspective. There are certainly challenges there, and those are things that I think governments and policy have to address. I'm not in any position to speak to what's needed there. But from an entrepreneurial perspective, as we were talking about earlier, things are changing faster than they ever have before. And I think it's fundamental that the mindset that we tend to have, perhaps it's a Western capitalist mindset to a degree, but we tend to have this idea that if I win, you lose, that there is a pie and it is limited. And so either I get it or you get it.
Right.
Now, maybe that's a client. I won this client and therefore you lost it. But
Well, and I love that you bring this concept of what I call the zero-sum game, right, into perspective, because I think for any of us, like, where does this originate? When you think back, I mean, it can be an individual mindset, but I think it is certainly a collective, but a corporate mindset, right? A very much, corporate, big boy mindset.
Yeah. Well, that's logical to an extent. I mean, if you look at it from a perspective of a corporate going for a tender, one of the companies is going to get it and the rest aren't. So in that sense, it makes sense, but that's not a win-win. And the name escapes me right now, but the founder of Whole Foods was a business owner who very unconventionally brought to the business model the idea that rather than having a responsibility to shareholders as the primary thing, the organizing principle of a business was the L word, which really must have blown people's minds, like love as the role of business. Now that's a completely different perspective, right? And I think what that leads into for me is that the pie is infinite. Let's be honest, there is more than enough out there for everyone. It's a distribution question, right? And so I don't like to look at this change dynamic from the perspective of I must get ahead so that others don't. I'd rather look at it as running in parallel. I need to develop my skills such that my business is uniquely valuable because it's only me that can do what I do. And that might sound trite to a degree, that I'm a unique whatever, right? But I think there's factual, concrete basis to that, which is you have a unique set of skills, experiences, biology, bio-individuality, like how do you show up?
Right. Well, Sorry, didn't mean
No,
to
go
cut
ahead.
you off,
Yeah.
but that's such a relevant example. Like this idea of uniqueness, like you and I, even before we went live, we're talking about, relative health journeys and the experience in these physical bodies. And like I was sharing my experience about working with one naturopath, trying all of these things to result in some outcome, right? Me feeling better. And then working with a functional medicine doctor, also, very much a natural approach to medicine, and having completely different approaches. One was primarily, like, we're going to test your blood, we're going to do this stuff to actually look at the science, right? Which I very much appreciate. The other one was all about body testing, muscle testing, reading the
Kinesiology.
body. Yes. And then where I'm at now, because we reached dead ends with those approaches, is a woman who, again, also a naturopath, lives in the same world of approaching medicine from a more natural standpoint, completely different approach. Like each one of these providers lives and comes from basically the same world. From the outside looking in, you could say has a similar approach to medicine, completely different methods, completely different ways that they approach what they do, right? So absolutely an example of how unique people can do in providing, from the outside looking in, the same service.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of brings me to what is the philosophy and the reason we called this company Learn and Think Better is we came across what is the origin of the word educate or education. And this blew my mind. It was absolutely fascinating. So when we say educate, what do we think of? The schooling system, universities, etc. And if you watch a movie like The Matrix, Trinity needs to know how to fly a helicopter instantly. So they plug in the program and now she can fly a helicopter. So she had knowledge installed in her brain. And that is the image we have of the brain is a storage mechanism and we shove the stuff in, right? In reality, when you look at it, education comes from ex, so out of, and ducere, which means leading out or bringing forth. So tying into the individual and the individuality, education, to educate, is to lead forth from the mind of the individual what is unique.
Like now, a creation process.
Exactly.
Almost. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So to educate is not to indoctrinate, it's to lead out what is unique about the individual. And the foundation of that and what we built all of this around is, and you said inversion a little bit earlier, which is a powerful mental model. So mental models and principles of effective learning, of effective thinking, etc., are what we bring into this entrepreneurial space and the entrepreneurial educational space. Because, and I think you're probably familiar with this person and this philosophy, but Krishnamurti said it's no measure of well-being to be well-adjusted to a profoundly sick society. So the belief is that we live in a profoundly sick society, in the sense that, well, I don't think we need to quote the health statistics to say we literally live in a profoundly sick society, but it's more a matter of we are not educated to think to the degree for ourselves that is necessary to bring about change in our own lives, but also broader societal change. So the way to sort of handle that is to cultivate things like critical thinking skills by looking at and installing mental models and principle-based thinking, where it's not about, as we see in business education in particular, I'm going to teach you this tactic, this method, and then you're going to go and do that, and results will follow, which a whole different angle on whether education approaches in business actually result in the desired business progress. But fundamentally, you're not teaching people principles that they can then go and apply. And I think of this as a teach a man to fish kind of example. Whereas in traditional education and business education, it's like, here's a salmon, and that's what you're stuck with. You know, do you
Yeah.
like salmon? Doesn't matter. Here's some salmon. And I think that's what's broken in our educational system. And I mean, I currently live in the Czech Republic, so I don't know much about the educational system here, but I'm originally from South Africa, and we followed a very English traditional model of education. And we were very fortunate that the school I went to had the resources, had the materials we needed to learn. But I do keep track of US media, and when I see things like teachers having to buy their own school materials and things like that, it just demonstrates that people are not being given and equipped with the education that they need, despite the best intentions of the teachers who show up every day and do their best to teach these kids and shape their lives, right? And so that's why we've sort of stepped back to a point where, if you look at the sort of ancient Greek and Roman educational approaches, the Stoics and such, not only was it a philosophical and sort of mental models, principles, etc., it even included a physical aspect. Like, their education there's a reason that schools are called gymnasiums.
Right.
It brought a more holistic approach in, and I think holistic is a key word that needs to be brought into the educational space in particular.
Yeah. Well, it's, what keeps coming to mind for me, not only around what you said earlier about the emphasis on value creation, but also the word creation, right?
Yeah.
And I think the thing that hasn't worked for a long time is that as human beings, we are creative. We are here to create. And the school systems don't necessarily teach you that. Well, there are ways that certain people do it better, right? Our school systems, by and large, at least here in the US, are designed, they were designed in the industrial era,
Yep.
right? To create a whole bunch of kids that could grow up and follow rules and go into industries and do a certain thing well. And really just, again, it's about creating a whole group of people that can follow rules. And it's not what we need now. It's just not what we need. And
Yep.
so the advantage in my mind that small businesses and entrepreneurs have had ahead of large businesses is the ability to be creative and to implement change more quickly, right? If you're a smaller, leaner model, there are ways that you have tremendous advantages over some of the larger businesses in the marketplace. Now, does that always even out? Not necessarily, right? You have to look at it as a whole, because there are certainly advantages that some of the big businesses have from a resource perspective, right? But I keep going back to this feeling of the need for us, especially in light of, the current landscape, the shifts that are happening, both for employees and entrepreneurs, to reconnect to our creative centers, right? Because I think that's where our unique and individual advantages exist.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's two elements to that it makes me think of. Is number one, we talk a lot now about the creator economy.
Yeah.
And that ranges everywhere from people with a 9 to 5 who start a side hustle, and they might be using things like no-code tools. You've got Notion and Zapier and all of the automation tools and different platforms that you can use to start a side hustle, maybe build a digital product and start to sell that on Gumroad, for example. And that goes all the way through to people who have fully transitioned into business. This creator economy that, as you say, it taps into one of the most fundamentally human qualities, which is creativity. And that's why within our program, what we look at is a set of they're basically futuristic or futurism models. One of them is called the 4 Futures. And that's sort of you're playing out possible trends for the future, and letting that guide your skill development. But the other one that is particularly relevant here is one called the 5 C's. And there it's basically saying, in a context in which technology, etc., is taking care of those rote things we used to have to do, what uniquely human qualities are of most value in the future. And neatly they fall into 5 C's. No crowbarring of that required, I'm sure. So you've got communication, collaboration, commercial acumen, so business acumen, and critical thinking.
Yes.
Very, very important. And then creativity. Those are the
I
things
love your
that,
5 C's so much. I know. I want you to say them again.
So communication,
Yep.
collaboration, commercial acumen, creativity, and critical thinking.
The interesting thing is, let's think about that list just for a moment in the context of historical traditional employment, right? Which of those things mattered? Not most of them, right? Maybe your
communication and collaboration, I guess.
Well, see, those to me, what I think about is that traditional employers used to, and maybe still do, hire for basically
compliance.
IQs. Yeah, compliance, but IQs and skills within, a certain subset of expertise, right? So maybe it would be the level of acumen related to a specific thing, but more and more this leaning into the soft skills of collaboration, of communication, right? Whether applied in a team environment or an individual entrepreneurial environment, because you have to communicate, right, to the marketplace, to your clients, etc. You have to collaborate with other vendors, with other people that are helping you build your, it's all relevant. But I love how clearly your list demonstrates this shift away from this narrow perspective around really specific traits that employers might look for, which really are just a demonstration for the most part that you learned a certain thing, you went to school, you're smart, you're top of the class, whatever, right? 2, being a much more well-rounded human being. Right? That's what your list tells me, is that being a more well-rounded human being is what serves the future.
So I a couple of things that sparked, as you were saying, number one, about soft skills. But as we were talking earlier about change and how inevitable it is and how you have always embraced it. I mean, there's the tired old joke about the only things that are guaranteed are death and taxes. Now, as we get into this longevity focus, and people having creative financial schemes, if you will, in various areas, it's starting to seem like both death and taxes are less guaranteed. But one thing that is guaranteed is change. Now, that's not heartening to anybody who's afraid of change, but I do think that it's necessary to cultivate gradually, as quickly as possible, a shift towards seeing change as an opportunity. And one of those changes that Sveta and I have discussed at length as we've talked about skill development and the elements of skill development is this distinction between soft and hard skills. And it's my view that to an extent, it's a somewhat artificial breakdown that is actually going away. Now, if you want to say mathematics, science, quantum physics, accounting, legal, any aspect of law, I certainly see how you might refer to that as a hard skill as distinct from a soft skill like communication, for example. But again, in this context of change, now think about the accountant or the lawyer. I think you are the perfect example. So you knew right away that practicing law within the traditional frameworks was not for you. And what that meant was you needed the legal skill, but you also needed the ability to get clients, to manage clients, to have rapport with them, to collaborate, to do all of those things. And as far as I'm concerned, and all trends seem to indicate, a lawyer or an accountant or an engineer in the future will need to do what you are doing. And so what does that mean? You now Does it mean soft skills and hard skills as a distinction goes away? Not necessarily, but it does mean that you need to be a more rounded value provider.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that all of those things become more integrated, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and for me, you know, I think one of the questions that I have for entrepreneurs is how do we, because there's also this reality that information is more accessible than ever, right? We've got a gazillion places that we can look to for education of a variety of kinds, for information, for you know, training, whatever it is. How, because I also know entrepreneurs can regularly get into the trap of over consuming and not implementing, right? So how do we distinguish between good and bad information, what is actually relevant to us, and, you know, and create a plan for ourselves that helps us actually achieve that path of continuing our learning in a way that will best support us and support our clients as we move forward?
That's almost like a perfect layup. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. I love that question.
Well, I think so many people live in the reality of that question, which is that information overload is a thing. And how many of us are constantly having to like cull our inbox and unsubscribe from newsletters and even unsubscribe from regular news and other things that used to dominate our information intake.
Well, this is, I think, probably there are many issues that are pressing in our modern world, but certainly information overload is a huge one. And I would argue it's even more relevant to entrepreneurs than to the general public. And the approach that I see people taking to managing information overload is something that, again, we focus on heavily within the future-proof entrepreneur concept, which is that there's a mindset shift needed. And you can't go tool first. Tool first is often a mistake, because that does not, that I like to think of that as trying to stop a fire hose with your kitchen sink plug. Like, not happening, right?
No.
What do you actually need to do? You need to find a way to reduce the amount of water coming out of that hose, reduce the pressure.
Yeah.
And that is a matter of relevance. So if you have ever been in the market for a car, say you had you decided that the perfect car for me is a, I don't know, top of my head, BMW M3, and it's going to be white. I absolutely guarantee that you started to see a hell of a lot of white BMW M3s out on the road. And you're like, wait, oh my goodness, everyone else is buying one. It's like, no, they were always there. And that is priming. That's your brain being primed to see what you're looking for. And that is the real answer to coping with information overload, at least a certain aspect of it. You need to identify what is relevant. And with that single act, you immediately eliminate or mark as not relevant right now everything else. And it's at that point that you're able to say, okay, let me bring in the tools and the processes to manage the remaining information. Obviously, that doesn't stop the number of emails that are coming into your world or the other forms of information. But the newsletter you just received from Thought Leader X that's talking about the new platform and the new tactic, if you are grounded in, okay, what is my stage of business? This is a key model that we always refer to. For example, where is my focus now? Or using these frameworks like the 4 futures or the 5 C's to identify the skills that are most impactful for you to develop now. If you identified, for example, I really need to improve my copywriting skills, and that's my focus for the next period, however long. That acts as a filter for what you should allow into your life, narrows and eliminates a whole lot of it, and then you put in place the tools that are sort of, where do you get your information? I've got emails coming at me, there are articles, I'm doing an online course, etc. So you set up your workflows and your processes to cope with that now drastically reduced flow of information.
What I'd love, sorry, didn't mean to jump in. I get really excited about this. What I love about what you've just described is, because for a long time I've said, and I think, you know, part of it is is, again, the question of how do we deal with, even as entrepreneurs, the amount of information, the amount of quote unquote experts that we should be listening to out there about how to build our business, right? And one thing that I've gotten really clear on is, and I think from the beginning was pretty clear on, I tend to be a pretty intuitive person, and something is either a clear yes or a clear no for me. There's not much in between. It's like, yep, that's what I need, or nope, that's definitely not what I need. And I'm not sure everybody has that. And it's not, I mean, our brains just work all differently, right? I'm not saying that it's a gift or anything. It's just how I have always functioned. But what it means is that I've always been really clear on, it's my job to decide what I need, and whether, even in hiring an expert to work with, whether it's the right next step or like a little bit out of line. And that's not to say that I haven't done things out of line. Certainly I have. But what has become even more clear over time is that it's our job to decide what we need and what is next, and what our path as an entrepreneur and as a business builder looks like, and not to outsource that to others, which I think is really easy for some people to do, is to just outsource that. And then that can really explode the overwhelm.
Well, this is the dynamic that I would say is most prevalent. And I would say the key to it, I mean, I can't speak to when that first emerged, or if it was always the case for you that you had that level of self-trust and self-reliance to say, you know what, I'm the best person to figure out what I need. And if I were to say, like, what is the reason that these particularly early stage entrepreneurs, but it does go further than that, is to fall into that trap of information consumption, learning without implementation. Fundamentally, what's at play there is a lack of trust. A lack of trust in yourself to be able to figure out what's best for you. And that is what shifts your locus of control external, where you're looking to authorities and you're trying to sift through. It's almost like you're panning for gold. The only problem is, how will you know when you've found gold? It's not this shiny, clear object. You don't really know what you're looking for, right? And you only end up undercutting yourself further with every new expedition you do, searching for the answer outside, because it always shifts. There's always another email coming into your inbox. There's always another platform, another tactic, whatever, right? And I would say the answer to that is to find ways to cultivate self-reliance and self-trust, but also to build systems and frameworks that are iterative, that allow you to take an imperfect action, which is the scariest thing for all of us. But I would say, again, even more so when you're in your earlier stages of business, because you don't have a track record to look back at and say, well, I tested this and it worked and it didn't work, and here's what I changed. You're like, oh my God, please somebody tell me what to do, because I came into this with one core skill, and then I realized there are like 65 others I need to learn. It's like, I'm a lawyer. I excel at providing legal services, but apparently I need to acquire clients, I need to invoice, I need to manage my financials, etc. And nobody told you that. And so that's what causes fundamentally the info overload, because you're trying to rapidly and reactively address those skill gaps. And if you had the framework to think ahead of time and make the plan for the skills that you need to develop, but also, again, Todd Herman, 5 Stages of Business, has been so influential for us in saying, well, okay, I'm in startup stage, and my focus should be on validation of my offer. So what should I be doing? What should I be learning? Only these things. If you're in that stage, you don't yet have enough client intake, you don't have predictable income, and you're thinking, well, let me look into buying that template set on how to outsource in my business because it popped up in my Facebook sidebar. God damn those adverts, right? Only $39, and then 17 upsell pages that follow. But fundamentally, it's about making sure you're doing the right thing for the stage that you're in. And that, again, is another lens you can look through that dramatically narrows down the amount of information you have to deal with. and the number of experts you have to listen to.
That's
It's
right.
like, leadership is not right for my state of business right now. Let me save that to my Evernote account. It's not going anywhere.
That's
Like,
right. Ding,
just
ding, ding.
leave it
Like
be.
what
Right.
is the right next thing, right? The immediately right next thing. And I think so often the pain that comes in that building journey is doing something out of order, like thinking like, oh yeah, I need that, or somebody oversold it to you or whatever, convinced you that this is going to be the solution to your problem. When you know, if you follow James' advice, I love what you said about, you know, developing that relationship of trust with yourself, you know, with a little reflection. And certainly we all need resources to call on to help us decide, you know, what is the path. But with a little reflection, we can easily actually determine, I might need that. I just don't need it right now. Right. So I love that. Like, save it for later and get really clear and continually ask, is this the right next thing? Is this the thing that will bring me an immediate result? And like you say, in the early days, it's about doing the work. It's about creating something that has been tested. And so many people get focused on marketing and website and blah, 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 right? I launched the Legal Website Warrior without even having a website. I just started
There you go.
emailing people that I thought I could serve through that new business model, and landed some of my top clients before I ever had a website or proof of concept out there in the world. It was just a conversation.
Imperfect action.
Yeah.
And there's an element of a massive element of our culture where, and I can speak to this because it's rarely been an issue for me, I would say, is that I don't know who said it, but essentially we end up comparing our behind the scenes to everybody else's highlights reel.
Totally.
And that is just as prevalent on the per body image, comparing yourself to Mr. Beach abs on Instagram, as it is to business envy.
Yes.
And it's so important what you said there about how you started so lean. I would invite anyone listening to go and have a look at what Facebook's first iteration looked like.
Yeah.
Have a look at Google, have a look at YouTube. Like, you will laugh yourself to tears at how bad it was.
Oh my gosh. On that point, yeah, because I used to be a photographer, and I was telling you, I'm scanning and going digital and everything. And so I found all these like brochures and some things that I had developed in the very first version of my photography business.
You're like, clip art.
MG. Totally. I was like, we have to get rid of this as quickly as possible. I am not scanning it, or, you know, anyways, it is hilarious, but also so important that we take those steps. So important that we
100%.
do those things, even if later looking back, it feels like a fumble, right? Because how else are we going to get to the end result? And I think so many people get stuck in preparing to launch, preparing to do the thing. They don't get to the point of doing the thing. And the only reason I was able to do that imperfect action that early in the launch of my second business is because I was working with a business coach who said, who can you help? And I named people at the top of the industries that I wanted to work with. And he said, okay, great, go help them.
You were like, really? You want me to contact that person?
Totally. And I did.
And now look at your
part
blind
of
list, right?
Yeah, I sat around being like, okay, why shouldn't it be me helping them, right? And so sorry, my doggy is barking. She's like, we're really done with this interview. I'm kidding. We'll see if she calms down. I think she probably hears a big truck outside. I'm just gonna close my door for a second.
Join.
I know, hilarious. Anyways, the only reason I was able to do that is because I trusted his advice, and I knew that it was the right next thing, even though it made me uncomfortable to do it. Did I think there was any way I was going to land some of those clients? No. In my heart of hearts, I'm like, who am I to be working with this person? But on the other side, I was like, I can help them. I can look at their online business and see that they need the kind of help that I provide.
Yeah.
Right.
So you might be the first business owner in history to suffer from imposter syndrome.
Right. Yeah.
Goodness me.
Exactly. Nobody understands what that is, right?
But I mean, it's all of that made me think of another thing that we see so commonly in the online business education world, which is
Maggie, quiet. Sorry, was I
liked-
on? I thought I was muted. I will delete that out. 1 second. I'm gonna just tell her to be quiet.
I couldn't even hear her, to be honest.
Well, she's actually a really good puppy. She's about 10 months, but
Oh,
I can hear a big truck idling outside, and I think that's what she hears. And in her yard time, she's gotten a little possessive where she hears a big truck pull up and she'll do these like preliminary barks, which
can you
anyways,
hear it loud on your side? Because I literally
you
couldn't.
can't, if you can't hear it, that's great.
Yeah, can't hear
Okay,
it all.
perfect.
Neither truck nor Maggie.
Excellent. Woohoo. I think the mic is doing its job.
It's doing its job.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's quite a number of problems that I see in the online education space. Two of them are curses. Now, curse of knowledge, I think a lot of people are familiar with that, where going back to the example of learning to drive a car, when I started learning to drive, allegedly I failed my test 3 times. I don't remember that, but essentially,
allegedly, I love your use of the word allegedly.
The accused. But
soundtrack version explicit.
Alexa has a lot of thoughts about that. Alexa,
goodness me.
stop. Alexa, stop. This is the joy of my children coming into my office when I don't know what they're doing, right? So Alexa is suddenly plugged in over there.
I love it. Oh,
Maggie and Alexa are having lots of thoughts
what we were saying
this.
about technology, right?
Yeah. Always listening. Anyway, so back to
the curse of knowledge, basically,
yes.
where when you start anything, whether it's skill development, like when I was starting to learn copywriting, I was painfully, consciously incompetent. Same applies to when I was learning to drive. Like every time I needed to change gear or manage that interplay between clutch and accelerator, it was a conscious effort. And eventually you get to the point where you can be having a conversation with the person next to you, eyes on the road, obviously, but you're unconsciously able to execute on that. And so the curse of knowledge in an online or any education space is when the person doing the teaching is, through even with their best intentions and awareness of that knowledge that they have that the person they're teaching doesn't have, it's extremely difficult to plug the gap and remember the connections, the dots that you've now connected that people in an earlier stage don't know. And so you can make these leaps of logic that somebody earlier on might say, but how did you get from here to here? And you're like, well, that's kind of just how it works, right? So that's a problem in online education. But the key one, I would say, that is most prevalent, particularly as we now shift into this world of Web3, where everything is new and it's a completely wild west out there before Mr. Zuckerberg even introduces his legless metaverse characters. You've basically got this curse of the asset. And the curse of the asset is a fascinating thing. It's where, again, I firmly believe that the majority of online education product creators have the best intentions and are not trying to run a scam on us. However, the curse of the asset is when you have a successful podcast in the top 3% of successful podcasts. And so if you were to create a podcasting program because your podcast has been a valuable asset in your business, and you said to somebody, well, you guys should start a podcast because it's had this result, and this result for me, that doesn't take into account the fact that you started podcasting a number of years ago when, well, in your case, podcasting was already extremely active and busy. But so let's take it back to somebody who really started in the early
days.
Yeah. Or content marketing.
Yep.
Or social media, organic social media, or even paid ads. That absolutely killed it for them. They got huge results. And the key here is why it's the curse of the asset, is they continue to get good results. but that is because of the work they did when they started.
Yeah.
So if you've built an authority website that ranks for a whole lot of terms, when you put out a new article, your chances of ranking are dramatically higher. Same if you've built a huge podcast audience or a massive organic social media following. If somebody were to start with those approaches now, their likelihood of success is dramatically lower. If, like SEO, could you enter the SEO game now for a competitive term and hope to rank? You better have some serious skills and time to work with. So that's the other issue that we see. And I think that is a key reason why, to a large degree, online education has sort of developed a bad name in some ways. It's like these business courses don't work. Well, there's a lot of sides to that. Number one, course completion rates are atrocious. Now that must come with an asterisk, because the statistic is like between 15 and 5% completion rates. But that's somewhat misleading, because what is completion in an online course? Referring back to Todd Herman again, we did the 90-day year program, which is fantastic. The first exercise is to gather the data on your business. And what he said is that many people do that exercise. It opens their mind completely to things they haven't seen, and they stop the program there. They're like, yeah, price of entry was well worth it. Now you mark that down as did not complete. So course completion rates are not necessarily a totally valid indicator, but I do think they're a directional indicator. And online courses get this, sort of have their reputation damaged because people don't get the results. Now, part of that is down to curse of knowledge, part of that down to curse of the asset. But I do think we need a better way. That's why we've seen the rise of things like cohort-based courses,
Yes,
which build in things like accountability, a compressed timeline. Obviously, they're not a panacea. Nothing is, but I do think it brings to life more of the experience we had at school or at university, where it was more real time. And fundamentally, accountability, having a so-called running mate, other people doing what you're doing in real time, things like that are incredibly powerful in an educational context.
totally. And I think
Yeah.
the other thing that this recent, the most recent part of this discussion points out is because I think people get overly concerned about technology. And while it's certainly a piece and a really important piece of the puzzle around all of our businesses, how we do things more efficiently, how we do things more effectively to achieve certain results, how we access our clients and get access to more people, like all of the ways that we use technology to communicate and run our business are super important. And still, I think what does not change about human nature, one, is our limbic system, right? So this is why cohorts work. This is why programs that still give participants access to the expert work better than a completely digitized mechanical process. And so in that way, I feel like people can have even more confidence that as an entrepreneur with a unique approach, a unique thing to offer, their own special sauce. And it is a little bit like learning to rely more heavily on yourself. But, it all wraps nicely into this conversation around getting reconnected to our creativity, using tools and technology to bolster what we already do in a way that makes it even better, right? That makes our business more accessible, all of these things, but to not lose focus on the fact that it's still in large part about you.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. And I think augmenting is probably the term that's most resonant for me in terms of that interconnection. I do remember going to an event just pre-pandemic where Sophia the robot was there. And apart from being a little freaky, this sentient human-shaped robot, well, not sentient, but seemingly intelligent robot who is also a citizen of Saudi Arabia, totally random, but that the interviewer was having a live conversation with her and asked her, like, what would you say to calm the fears of humans who are worried that artificial intelligence is going to take over? And she said what was probably the most intelligent answer given in the entire event, which was, we, the machines, are here to augment you, to take away the things you don't have to do, that you don't want to do, to bring, to free up your capacity to do what is human. Now, I won't comment on whether that was actually from her or whether that was a nice little pre-programmed number, but the message, I think, is relevant, right? So in the hands of the people out there who make the decisions, who knows if we're going to approach a Skynet Terminator scenario in the future. I certainly hope not and think we won't. But in the meantime, using it to augment us, to capitalize on opportunities, not in the sense of, let me get one over on this dude over here, but how can I augment what's uniquely me? And one of the terms we have discussed in the past was, there's a book that was recommended to me when I first started learning about content marketing, 2014 or so, called The Trusted Advisor. And I think it was actually written for lawyers as a, here's how to work with your clients effectively, to be their trusted advisor. And fundamentally, that's what we see the role of skill development and ongoing education, ongoing learning as. If you're a service-based business, you need to be the trusted advisor. You need to be what we now think of as like a growth agent, because it's too common now that service-based business owners, freelancers, etc., they kind of, in a way, they're like a glorified task rabbit or a bolt-on team member, like come into our Slack and we'll just act like you're an employee. Particularly as competition increases, it becomes more and more important to position yourself as, and to actually be, the trusted advisor, the growth agent that your clients rely on for demonstrable results. That in order to do that, you need a unique, rare set of skills. You need a way to continuously be on top of what's changing, what's relevant, etc., without drowning in information overload, right? So it's again about, you need to identify what's relevant, important, impactful, gain that mastery to the degree that you need to, and be able to apply it in the context of value delivery.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the key challenge that entrepreneurs face now.
Yeah. Well, and it's, what also comes to mind is that we have a wide range of tools and technology available. And so I think entrepreneurs also face the challenge of how to select what fits, how to, right? And I know from personal experience, but also from serving people in this space, how much that can trip people up, right? I want to be respectful of your time, but I would be so curious to hear your thoughts on how people thoughtfully select the technology that will best support them.
Yeah. I want to stress that throughout everything we've spoken about today, this is not in any way sort of an ivory tower perspective. I firmly believe that people who develop a solution for others in a particular area, for it to be a good solution, it's got to be something you've struggled with yourself. So the reason I have built a learning system, the reason I've built a knowledge management system, the reason I've thought about information overload is because they are all things I've massively suffered with and struggled with in the past, right? So I've built these things to help me, and then thought, okay, others can benefit from this. And one of the key ones is that there's 1,000,001 tools out there. Which one do I choose?
Yeah.
And what are the criteria by which I decide, will I stay with this one or will I move to another one? And you just need to peruse the world of note-taking apps to see, go on Reddit and you'll see, I've recently shifted from Evernote to Roam Research to Obsidian, and now I'm considering Notion. And then all I can think is, so this is a tool that's supposed to make you productive, and you've spent the last how long porting your information between different note-taking apps. And that's what we see, right? So the solution, from my perspective, the earliest productivity related learning I did was reading David Allen's GTD, which is absolutely, to this day, I can go back to it and learn something brand new. And he said, until you can manage your system on paper, you have no business putting it into any tool. So that's what it comes down to. Tool first thinking focuses on the features, what this tool can do that one can't. Instead, if you're looking at what am I trying to achieve here, while simultaneously recognizing that there is no tool out there that can do it all.
Right.
And if there was, you wouldn't want it because it wouldn't be very good at it. By definition, it can't be the best at everything. So you want to keep your tool stack as lean as possible. You want to, as I was once taught, you want to one everything. In other words, one tool for each function. Maximum. Like you can't have two note-taking tools. That's just not, it just doesn't work, right? So you may not be able to have your website platform be your email automation and also be your CRM. You may need different ones, but create a set of criteria and sort of like run the scenario. What must I have? What's nice to have? Make a decision and recognize you can bend tools to your requirements, but really think hard before you go, well, this one's just introduced this feature, so I'm going to jump. Because there is, what do you call it? It's opportunity cost, immense opportunity cost in spending that time. The important thing, I think, particularly as businesses of one, to think about is opportunity cost is far more costly for us because we don't have a team, we don't have other people to do that work for us, the porting over, the learning curve that comes with every tool. So it's not just about the time you're spending shifting to another tool, it's what you aren't doing while you're doing that, right? Right. So that's another thing to factor in.
Yeah, well, and I love you mentioning like basically to shift away from a tools first mentality, because I think so many people get stuck there. They're told like, this tool is going to solve all your problems, or this particular software is going to do A, B, C, and X, Y, and Z. And really it's about, what functions do you need completed in your business? Think of them like an employee to deliver a particular kind of experience to your client, or to help you with a certain thing that just has to get done, right? But to not have your business, because the other thing that I think we have all learned at some point in our journey is like those tools can go away in a heartbeat.
Oh yeah.
Right.
That's
or
crucial.
you build your business around a certain social media platform or whatever. Just the other day, LinkedIn, a platform that I love, right, apparently yanks people off it, without notice on a regular basis, right? If they're posting, especially right now, there's so many discussions on LinkedIn around race. And I think they're important discussions. I think they need to be there, but the powers that be will sometimes take those accounts down. And this woman with a massive following, 40,000 or something just on LinkedIn alone, right? Her account disappeared and just like that. And other people,
I didn't have 40,000 Twitter followers, but my account also got removed. I still don't know why. I contacted Twitter about 7 months ago and I still haven't heard. And to be honest, that's it was a sort of a push in the right direction that essentially prompted me to get off social media entirely, apart from having a LinkedIn profile.
Well, and this gets back to
the value of them,
right.
In this new context.
Totally. And it gets back to, how are we designing our businesses from the get-go so that, not only do we have, because all of us need some kind of machine in our business that is monetizable, but that gives us control and access to our people. And if obviously you're building on rented platforms or using tools that you have no control over, right? I mean, I think we all need a backup plan, but to move away from the tools first model, I think cannot be overstated,
Absolutely.
while also recognizing the importance of these tools and being able to rapidly incorporate change into our business. So it really is in the balance, which,
Yeah.
you know, I love when I see everyday examples of that. I've been listening to a podcast where they've been talking actually about Aristotle and how much he taught about staying away from extremes, like in all things, that the
Moderation.
healthful place to be is in the balance, is in
Mhm.
moderation, right? And
Mhm.
even this conversation around tools and technology, I think, brings that to light.
Yeah. Absolutely.
James, who are your favorite people to support? Obviously, you live in the world of entrepreneurship and online information. Talk to me specifically about who it is you support, and then also where people can find you.
So our focus, and I think the people that we are best placed to support and help with what we do, is service-based entrepreneurs, freelancers, solo entrepreneurs, people who conceptualize themselves as companies of one. If you're familiar with Paul Jarvis and his book, it's like the mentality of the people that we gel with gel with most is essentially those people who are not looking to get VC funding and IPO and all of that sort of stuff and do an exit.
Yep.
It's about people who are building a business both for a specific lifestyle that they want to create, but also the work that they do is meaningful to them.
Yes.
Service-based freelancers, freelance writing is my background. Sveta has a background of consultancy and now coaching. So people in those fields, service-based, who recognize the need for continuous skill development and want to put themselves in a position of, to rob a term from Nassim Taleb, anti-fragility. And in terms of where you can find us, we are on learnandthinkbetter.com. And yeah, that's everything about us and the future-proof entrepreneur program. It's all at learnandthinkbetter.com.
I love it. So if you're listening, you can find those links. I'll include any social media links that you want to share, or I know you've got a beta version of your new program coming up, right? You want to talk about
Yes, we do.
about that for a minute?
Yeah, so we are extremely excited about this because the way that we see it, this is a co-creation opportunity. Like, I've been grounded in and fascinated by these elements of futuristic thinking, the implications for the entrepreneur, but also the fundamentals of effective learning. And what you come to realize when you dive into this at all is that we are not taught to learn. We do not know how to learn. And there is so much impact that you can make if you do actually take on board and apply the fundamentals of effective learning. The core about the program, though, is it's about implementation.
Yeah.
So you will learn the methods of effective learning, but it's not a learning program. It's an implementation program.
Oh,
You'll
I love
come in,
that.
identify the skill that's going to make the most impact, and then actually go about learning a system by applying it.
Yeah. So important, the application piece of it. And what comes to mind is, like, it sounds like it's a whole separate conversation, the point you just raised about we really don't know how to learn. Right? Like, that just seems like, which I agree. And I think that the more that we understand about the human brain, about the way that things work, right? Most of us were shoved into a system that really was not designed for us.
Yeah. So we can save people a lot of time by just saying, don't bother with speed reading. Not worth it.
And you know what I learned about that? My brain can't do it. Do you know why? Because I am so detail oriented. I'm input and like on the strengths finder and just how my brain orients to things. Like, while I can read quickly, I'm an avid reader and I read a lot. I cannot really effectively be a speed reader because my brain wants to look at and catalog everything. So skipping parts to me just doesn't really work. And that's how it feels to try to speed read. Anyways, it took me connecting with an expert on this to realize, like, oh, it's not for me. Okay. Well, I'll just continue with my kind of normal, like rapid
Normal
reading
pace
and just
reading. Yeah.
skip the speed reading. Yeah. So that's, I think, a really good point. James, I so appreciate you. I have loved knowing you for the years that our time has overlapped. And I'm so grateful to have you here to have this super important, informative discussion with us today.
I really appreciate it. Yeah, it was fantastic to talk to you again.
Super fun. Well, and our time, we might even split this into 2 episodes. We'll have to see what we do with this,
Ooh.
but yeah, we'll keep you posted. If you're listening, pop over. I want you to obviously follow James online. Check out his program, The Future Proof Entrepreneur. We're going to share all of his links at the show notes page, which can be found at legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. James, what final either you could leave a final thought with us or an action step that you would like our listeners to take?
So one of my favorite things from James Clear, who's the author of Atomic Habits, is he said, imagine you walk into the gym and you're just starting a new workout program and you try to pick up the weight and you find, wow, that weight's heavy. Do you say to yourself, I think I'm going to pack this in. I'm not good at weightlifting. No, you don't. You pick up the weight and you recognize it's going to take a few lifts and I'm going to get progressively stronger. And the same applies to your business, to your skill development, etc. So I would just invite people to bring that. That's fundamentally a growth mindset, right?
Yeah.
Bring that into your business. Recognize that your brain is the most incredible biocomputer out there, and don't sell yourself short on your learning efforts, because you really can change your brain, learn and think better.
I love it. I love that so much. Thank you so much again, James, for your time today. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.